Imagine a place deep in the South American jungle, hidden beneath a canopy of trees, where nearly 1,000 American citizens lived in a self-proclaimed paradise. They had fled the racism, poverty, and chaos of the United States in search of peace, justice, and unity. At the center of this utopia was a man, a preacher, a prophet, a revolutionary. His name was Jim Jones. To his followers, he was a god. To the outside world, he would become something else entirely. The architect of one of the most horrifying mass tragedies in modern history. What led nearly 1,000 people, including hundreds of children, to willingly or forcibly drink poison? To understand the ending, we must begin with the man. This is not just the story of Jonestown. This is the rise and fall of Jim Jones. It was hot that night, thick jungle heat, the kind that made the air feel like it was pressing against your skin. But it wasn't the weather that made the people of Jonestown uneasy. They had stood in the central pavilion many times before, lining up in solemn silence as Jim Jones took the stage. White Night, he called it, a loyalty test, a drill. They had practiced this before, drinking what they thought was poison, only to be told minutes later it was a test of obedience, a test of faith. But this time, something was different. There was no joking in Jim's voice, no playful smugness, just that same old raspy sermon tone, laced with exhaustion and finality. A girl clutched her mother's leg. A man stared blankly ahead. Murmurs rippled through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Jim's words were calm, yet chilling. "They're coming for us," he said. "The congressman is dead. We will not be prisoners. We will not go back to the fascists. We die with dignity. This is our revolutionary suicide." And then the cups came out. To make sense of how they got there, how nearly 1,000 people ended up in the middle of the jungle drinking poison on command, we need to go back decades. Back to a young boy in Indiana with a strange obsession with death, power, and salvation. Jim Jones was born in 1931 in the small town of Crete, Indiana. His childhood was marked by isolation. His father, a disabled World War I veteran, was emotionally distant. His mother was ambitious but frustrated with small-town life. Jim found solace in books and religion. Neighbors remembered him as odd, a boy who held funerals for animals, who preached from tree stumps, who lurked around churches of all kinds, soaking up the fire and brimstone sermons. He was smart, bright even, but dark, obsessed with authority and the mechanisms of control. He devoured the works of Hitler and Stalin, not out of admiration, but fascination. How could one man bend so many people to his will? What was the secret to absolute obedience? As he grew older, Jim discovered his talent, the gift of speech. In an America still divided by race, poverty, and class, he knew how to talk to people who felt ignored. In the 1950s, the post-war boom was lifting millions into suburban bliss, but many, especially people of color, were being left behind. Jim saw the church as the perfect vehicle to reach them. He became a pastor in Indianapolis and quickly gained a reputation for being different. His services were electrifying, blending Pentecostal passion with progressive ideals. He called out racism from the pulpit. He opened the church to people of all backgrounds. He even adopted children of different races, calling his household a rainbow family. To many, he was a visionary, but it wasn't just love and inclusion. From the beginning, Jim preached sacrifice. He demanded complete devotion, asking followers to turn over their paychecks, cut ties with family, and confess their sins to him. He said it was necessary for salvation. He didn't just want to save souls, he wanted to shape a new society. In 1956, he founded his own church. The name was long, the People's Temple Full Gospel Church, but people simply called it the People's Temple. It was part sermon, part social justice rally. He preached equality, fed the hungry, housed the poor. Membership grew rapidly. By the late 1960s, the People's Temple had expanded to California, where Jim found a new audience. Political activists, Black civil rights leaders, anti-war protesters, and even disillusioned middle-class families searching for meaning. California in the 1970s was fertile ground for movements. Everything was being questioned. Government, religion, family, even reality itself. Amid this chaos, Jim Jones looked like a savior. He aligned himself with powerful figures. Politicians praised him for his racial work. Celebrities attended his services. He became, in some circles, a saint. Behind closed doors, however, the saint was slipping into madness. He had grown addicted to drugs, amphetamines to keep him going, barbiturates to calm him down. He stopped speaking of Christ and started referring to himself as the only God that mattered. He told his congregation that the outside world was corrupt, evil, and racist, and that he was the only one who could save them from it. He began holding late-night meetings, called White Nights, where members were forced to prove their loyalty. Sometimes this meant signing over assets. Sometimes it meant writing false confessions of crimes. Other times it meant drinking from a cup, not knowing if it was poison. No one ever refused. By 1973, the church was less of a congregation and more of a cult. Members were forbidden from leaving. Those who tried were harassed, threatened, or cut off from their children. Loyalty was absolute. Dissent was crushed. Jim had created his own empire, and he knew it couldn't last in America. The media had begun to dig. Former members spoke of abuse, manipulation, even violence. Lawsuits loomed. Jones knew the end was near. He needed an escape, a blank slate. And so he looked south. Deep in the jungle of Guyana, a country on the northern coast of South America, Jim bought thousands of acres of land. He called it the Promised Land, Jonestown. It was remote, unreachable by road, far from prying eyes. He promised his followers paradise, a self-sustaining socialist utopia where they could live free from racism, capitalism, and government intrusion. It sounded like heaven. In 1977, hundreds of people boarded planes, buses, and boats. Some went willingly, others coerced. Children were taken, families were split. But once they arrived, it was clear. Paradise was a lie. Jonestown was not the dream they had been sold. It was a labor camp. Residents worked long hours in brutal heat. Food was scarce. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter. There were no phones, no newspapers, no escape. Loudspeakers played Jim's sermons 24/7. Every waking moment was under surveillance, and yet many still believed, because belief was all they had left. Let me know when you're ready for the expansion of chapters 5 to 7, or if you'd like an audio narration script version too. A buzz of heat and noise simmered in the air over Jonestown. The jungle was dense and loud, a wall of green and sound that never stopped pressing in. At the center of it all, Jim Jones sat beneath a canopy of canvas, sunglasses shielding his eyes, his voice echoing across loudspeakers. He barely moved now. His health had deteriorated, his gait slow, his speech often slurred from sedatives and amphetamines. But even weakened, his power remained intact. He had built a world here, and he ruled it like a prophet king. Every morning began with roll call, not just names but confessions. Public shame was a tool Jim used well. He called people out, made examples of them. If someone expressed doubt, complained about the food, or even mentioned missing America, they would be summoned to the pavilion and humiliated. Sometimes they were beaten. Sometimes they were isolated for days in wooden boxes or deep pits. It was discipline masked as purification, and those who watched learned to keep quiet. He kept the people tired. They worked all day under the sun, cultivating cassava, raising pigs, building structures that always seemed to need more repairs. They were told this was noble sacrifice, that they were the builders of a new world, one that would inspire revolutions across the globe. But most were simply exhausted and starving. The food rations dwindled. Once meals had been promised as plentiful and nutritious. Now people survived on rice, watery soup, and scraps. Jim, meanwhile, had his own private stash. Better meals, drugs, alcohol, and imported luxuries. The line between him and his followers had grown into a chasm, but no one dared say it aloud. He read nightly news broadcasts over the loudspeakers, filtered and twisted to reinforce his worldview. America was collapsing, he told them. Race wars were erupting. Nuclear annihilation was near. Only Jonestown was safe. Only here could they survive the end of days. His voice boomed into every hut, every corner of the settlement, convincing, insisting, repeating. Then came the tapes. He had people record loyalty tapes, hours of testimonials, professions of love and trust in Jim Jones, and denouncements of defectors. These weren't private recordings. They were played for the community. The message was clear: stay in line or be named a traitor. Fear was the mortar holding Jonestown together. And still, people tried to leave. Some whispered of escape at night, huddled in secret, making plans. But the jungle was unforgiving, and the guards were vigilant. Defectors were punished, often with public ridicule or isolation. Mothers were threatened with having their children taken away. Families were torn apart. Escape was not just discouraged, it was made unthinkable. Then a name began circulating outside Jonestown: Leo Ryan. In November 1978, he boarded a plane with journalists, staffers, and concerned relatives. They landed in Guyana and made their way toward Jonestown. Jim was informed. Panic swelled beneath the surface. He had always told his followers that the government would come, that agents of destruction would descend, and now they had. He warned them that Ryan's visit was the beginning of the end. Ryan arrived with cameras, notebooks, and questions. Jim greeted him politely, carefully. He arranged performances, songs, testimonies, happy faces. At first, everything looked fine, but the cracks appeared quickly. Some residents passed secret notes to the visitors, begging to be taken out. They whispered, pleaded. One note said simply, "Help us get out of Jonestown." Ryan was shaken. He had expected trouble, but not the quiet desperation that met him behind smiles. He agreed to take those who wanted to leave. The next day, they prepared to depart. Jim tried to keep it calm, but his grip was slipping. He watched as people he had controlled for years stood up and walked away. That afternoon at the Port Kaituma airstrip, as Ryan's group waited to board planes, gunmen arrived on tractors. They opened fire. Congressman Leo Ryan was shot dead. So were a cameraman, a photographer, and others. Several more were wounded. Survivors scattered into the jungle. Back in Jonestown, the die had been cast. Jim called the community to the pavilion. He didn't scream. He didn't rage. He simply spoke, slowly and deliberately. "We have been betrayed," he said. "They're coming. They will torture us. They will take our children. We cannot go back. We must die with dignity." He called it revolutionary suicide. He called it an act of protest. But there was no choice in what came next. Mothers were told to bring their children to the front. Syringes filled with cyanide-laced flavor aid were prepared. Infants were dosed first, then toddlers, then teens. Some resisted, some begged. Armed guards stood watch. Parents were forced to watch their children die. Some injected themselves willingly. Others had it forced down their throats. Jim sat on his throne, surrounded by a small group of loyalists, speaking calmly as people screamed and collapsed around him. He told them this was not death. This was victory. One woman stood and pleaded for another way. She was shouted down. Others tried to run. They were shot. The air grew thick with the smell of chemicals, sweat, and blood. In less than an hour, over 900 people were dead. Bodies lay in heaps. Children curled beside their mothers. Elderly slumped in chairs. The jungle buzzed with life around the silent dead. Jim Jones did not take the poison. He was found with a bullet wound to the head. Some say he ordered a loyal follower to pull the trigger. Others believe he couldn't face the poison he had forced on so many. Either way, the man who had promised paradise died surrounded by horror. It was the largest loss of American civilian life in a deliberate act until September 11, 2001. The name Jonestown became synonymous with blind devotion, with the terrifying power of belief twisted into something monstrous. But before the bodies were found, before the headlines broke, before the world knew what had happened, there was silence. A heavy final silence under the jungle canopy, where once there had been song, sermons, and desperate hope,